My name is Miranda Pollock, and I did my project over insulation and how well a model of a room can keep temperature inside. And I used two thermometers, one inside of the box and one outside, to see how, if the outside temperature stays the same, if the inside temperature is going up or down, or if it's staying the same as well, and how the heat rod, which was used to create the heat, can keep the temperature raised or the same. And in most of the trials, the temperature would go up at a steady pace and then stay around 75 degrees for the rest of the remaining time. And the insulation that was used is called R13 vat insulation, which is a normal insulation used for homes. Our values can be raised from 12 to 60, depending on if it's for your attic or basement, and what kind of building it is. In the literature review, it mainly talks about the R value and how certain weather conditions can affect certain types of insulation, because there aren't just one type of insulation. And I used R13 vat insulation, but there are foam types of insulation where you can spray it, and that can seal. And then the R values, usually for most basements, depending on which state you live in and the average climate, you would want a lower insulation type for a warmer state. And if it's in the basement, then you might want it to be a little bit warmer down there if you are using insulation in the basement. And then for attics, it's usually used foam insulation, which you use specific equipment that has to spread it out across the entire attic floors. And it usually holds in heat really well, depending on the brand or, again, the R value. The R13 vat insulation was the most common insulation used for really thin walls for Georgia. And there's different sections of a state that has to have certain R values. And when you're building a home, engineers have to take that into account and to see how thick they want to make the walls. I selected this project because I was going through a list of items that I could make a project over and decided that insulation was most interesting to me. And it ended up being very interesting to find out how the temperature could just stay at a steady pace. And I think that's because the heat rod only gets to a certain temperature, which is about 75 degrees Fahrenheit. How I started was I built a box that you could open, and I used a thermometer to determine how much temperature was going, either staying inside of the box or leaving the box. And I used a heat rod, which is used in gun safes, to keep moisture out of the guns. And I would let that run for hours, and every hour I would test if the temperature went up or down. And most of the time it would go up and then stay at a steady pace. And how the box was laid out was, it was longer and then up to about 2 feet tall. And the insulation was placed in the walls, on the floor, and on the top, where the top could come out, and you could put the heat rod inside of it and check the temperature, which was checked every single hour. And most of the trials were around 8 hours long total. There weren't many surprises in the project, except for the temperature staying the same after a few hours. And then during the build, it was very interesting because I learned how to use a table saw for the first time, and I learned how to properly insert insulation into certain wall divisions and how thick they need to be, and how the R value determines how much heat can leave the room.